This is a diagram representing the plot structure of Fire Emblem Three Houses. And this is a flowchart representing the gameplay decision tree for the story routes of Fire Emblem Three Houses. It's fairly easy to observe, seeing them side by side, that these two charts don't match up. That should be an uncontroversial statement. What might be controversial, however, is that because these two charts don't match up, it makes the game very hard for me to love. And today, I want to talk about that. Three Houses is a fantastic game. Its story and characters have captivated the community. It's become the Fire Emblem game for an entirely new generation of fans. And having seen that same thing happen with Awakening and Fates, seeing it happen again with a game that I think stands alongside the best games in the series in terms of writing quality makes me unbelievably happy. By all rights, I should love Three Houses, but I can't get over one fundamental flaw. I burned out on this game. Bad. And I think the reason has everything to do with how the game structures its roots. For those who have been living under a rock, me apparently if my upload schedule is any indication, the hook of Three Houses is that your avatar, Byleth, is selected to teach at a military academy for the noble scions of the various countries within the fantasy setting of Fodland. This military academy has three houses, each representing a country. As the game progresses, you uncover a conspiracy that leads to all-out war between these countries. The house you choose to teach becomes the country you find yourself aligned with in a massive continent-spanning war. That hook necessitates this chart. Story and gameplay working in harmony. Fantastic, right?
It's a total fabrication.
If the story chart looked the same as the gameplay chart, this video would not exist. Likewise, if the inverse were true. But they don't, and here we are. The story hook necessitates this specific gameplay decision tree because the game only guarantees you the units from the house you picked. While you can recruit students from other houses, you are locked out of certain units, and the social aspects of the monastery make it very hard to recruit everyone who isn't route locked without a guide or very smart and optimal routing. What this means is that if the gameplay decision tree looked like the plot diagram, you could very well soft-lock yourself into a situation where none of the units you use throughout the Academy arc are given to you when you choose which route to take, were the route split to occur at the end of the Academy arc, for instance. This in turn creates an interesting predicament because the Academy arc is extremely samey regardless of which route you choose. The meaningful differences between your choices affect mostly which units you have and what clues you get to the mystery that unfolds as the B-plot to a mostly episodic Academy arc. The maps and big plot beats are all the same, with only subtle changes. The effect is that because of the length of the Academy arc, you end up with the first 10 or so hours of a single playthrough of Three Houses being almost exactly the same story-wise, and because you're route locked so early on, there is no way to skip or cheese this repetition. And that works against the hook. Fire Emblem Three Houses is so fantastic because the story's post-time skip take such wildly different directions, twists, and turns. The game's magic and peak moments is locked behind 10 hours of gameplay that is the same on every playthrough. By the time of your third run, it starts to get old. Especially if you chose Blue Lions early on, as in my opinion the Academy arc is at its best on that route. This game burned me out so bad. I was skipping Academy arc cutscenes on Golden Deer, and when I learned I had to go back and do Black Eagles all over again to get a worse version of Verdant Wind, I dropped the game. I have never dropped a game I would call fantastic. A game I think has amazing writing and characters. But I dropped Three Houses because the game itself wanted me to work for it. I didn't play every route in Three Houses, but I did in a different Fire Emblem game. This is a diagram representing the plot structure of Fire Emblem Fates. And this is a flowchart representing the gameplay decision tree for the story routes of Fire Emblem Fates. It's fairly easy to observe, seeing them side by side, that these two charts match up. That should be an uncontroversial statement. What might be controversial, however, is because these two charts match, it makes the game very easy for me to love. And today, I want to talk about that. Back in 2016, when Fire Emblem Fates came out, the fashionable thing to do to be a cool guy in the Fire Emblem community was to hate it. But I think time has brought me a new outlook on Fates. I'm a better critic now, a better writer now, and I would hope a better person as well. There's a lot to be said about the pros and cons of Fates, but in my opinion, the game deserves nothing but praise for how it handles its route system. In simple terms, it's basically perfect, and I want to discuss why. For those who haven't played Fire Emblem Fates, shout out to all you Three Houses and Engage Zoomers, the hook of Fates is that your avatar, Corrin, is the scion of a royal family and a nation called Hoshido. As a very young child, you are kidnapped and raised as a ward of the royal family of the neighboring country of Nor. You don't remember this past and have grown up only knowing your Norian step-siblings. In a very quick chain of events, you are stranded in Hoshido after a border dispute goes wrong, and you learn the truth of your heritage. Some stuff happens, and then this cascades into open war between the two countries. When your adopted family and their army arrive to attack Hoshido and your birth family, you are forced to choose what matters more to you. Bonds or blood. That is a damn good hook. At a first glance, Fates and Three Houses seem to be built on the same framework. Avatars, route splits, easy. But why does Fates match its route progression and story progression when Three Houses doesn't? Well, simply put, the difference in philosophy between the two games. Fates does the gameplay legwork to make it so that when you pick your route, the game gets completely different. Fates achieves this by doing several things Three Houses doesn't. For one, it is very easy to look at Fate's route progression compared to Three Houses and simply point at the chapter count as the sole cause of the difference. But in my opinion, that misses a huge degree of nuance. Fates has 6 shared chapters, whereas Three Houses has 11. That's almost double. Case closed, right? Wrong! It's not as simple as more chapters equals more longer. Were that the case, Fire Emblem 4 would be the shortest game in the series by a mile. It is crucial to also consider what chapters are shared. In most Fire Emblem games, the first 5 or so are often short, less complicated, and the tutorial maps. This is true of both Fates and Three Houses. The effect of this is that those 5 extra chapters in Three Houses before the route split are meaningful, legit, big boy early middle game chapters where the difficulty curve begins to kick in. Chapter count is also not the only factor, because Fates also does not have as in-depth of a between-chapter downtime system like the Monastery and Three Houses. Activities in the Monastery will balloon your playtime in the first half of the game significantly. The Fates My Castle system is nowhere near as robust, for one, and it isn't even unlocked until after you choose your route. Finally, Fates does something Three Houses wouldn't dream of doing. Fates is willing to rent players' units and have an ordinal route structure. This is a byproduct of the early Fates games having such a short chapter count. There's very little difference that any given unit from the shared chapters who is taken away on one route will be one you're invested in with a bunch of XP and resources. Plus, this only happens with 2 units, Gunter and Rinka, both of whom are very clearly telegraphed to one path or the other, meaning an observant player can plan accordingly. The majority of the units recruited in Fates, even ones shared between Birthright and Conquest, are recruited after Chapter 6, so the investment softlock we discussed in Three Houses is completely a non-issue. Not to mention, Fates also has a clear order of what routes to play when. You play either Birthright or Conquest first, play the other one, and then go play Revelations. This is not the case in Three Houses. In Three Houses, the Academy arc is so similar, you can really stumble into each and every one of them. And this leads into interesting predicaments. For instance, if you do Blue Lions first, the best version of the Academy arc, you ruin the Academy arc for the rest of your playthroughs. Conversely, should you save it for later so you don't? I don't know. What's the good answer? I don't know. Fates, you just do it like this. It's not that hard. All of this is to say, every issue I have with Three Houses' route progression is completely absent in Fates. The script for the first 6 chapters in Fates is also identical because the route split is yet to occur. And because of how the game makes it impossible to softlock your unit investment, copying your save file to skip the tutorial is completely viable. Simply put, it's perfect. So, how did we end up going backwards? Fates got route progression perfect, and Three Houses not so much. If you look at the release order of these games, one might be left scratching their head. How did the worst route progression system come in the later game? For one, this makes the naive assumption that companies want to improve with each iteration, and for two, the kind of experiences these games deliver are not as close as you might imagine. At first glance, one might assume that Three Houses takes the ideas of Fates and does them all better. No one route per physical copy unless you get the Scalp to Hell special edition bullshit, more routes overall, less gimmicky characters, no shoehorned inclusion of child units, more robust downtime systems, no tone butchering localization issues. These are all criticisms of Fates that Three Houses addresses and, to my mind, improves on. But how does it do all that while screwing up the thing that Fates got 100% right? It's because the experience Fates wants to deliver is a narrative one. Fates was a direct response to the criticism of Awakening's narrative being lackluster compared to the older Fire Emblem games. Understanding choices it makes, like Corrin being the main character rather than a deuteragonist, only makes sense when taken relative to what people complained about with Awakening. This is why Fates was so disappointing for a lot of Western players. That aforementioned tone-butchering localization robbed the game of a lot of nuance in its moment-to-moment dialogue, and made the fact that the game still has numerous dubious plot points that are intrinsic to the plot structure itself, language be damned, all the more obvious and frustrating. But the triumph of Fates, regardless of its execution, was that it knew to serve the narrative experience it wanted to deliver, where route choices were so meaningful that they thought it was necessary to justify selling separate physical versions with one route each, that they had to nail the gameplay aspect of the route structure, and boy did they succeed. Three Houses, conversely, has a very different set of priorities compared to Fates. The kind of narrative Three Houses wants to be is a slow burn, and that slow burn necessitates a long introduction, where tension, character, rivalries, mysteries, and twists are built up to create the best drama possible. This works in tandem with the second priority of Three Houses. The gameplay experience it wants to offer isn't the same as Fates. Fates wants to show how different the maps, unit types, and story is between the three paths. But Three Houses wants you to invest in and customize your units. The game caters to the number go up optimizer parts of the brain, encouraging you to experiment, make builds, invest huge in your units, and find broken combos and synergies. It's like the Pathfinder or Fire Emblem games. And if Engage was any indication, this optimizer crowd is the demographic Intelligent Systems is trying to cater to with their modern Fire Emblem games. When viewed from that perspective, that Three Houses' gameplay priority is to invest and customize first, suddenly the length of the monastery section, and the fact that the game goes very out of its way to not put you in a unit investment softlock situation, suddenly makes a whole lot more sense. This concession to the optimizers forces the route structure to differ from the story structure. And if you're not an optimizer, you burn out. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. It's been a while, hasn't it? Truth be told, a lot of life things got in the way, and my motivation to make content basically dried up because I found other hobbies that I loved more than talking about Fire Emblem online. In fact, this whole video basically started out as a script entitled Falling Out of Love with Fire Emblem. And in it, I went on a very long tangent about the differences in route structure between Three Houses and Fire Emblem Fates, and that sounded like a lot more fun of a video to make, so that's the video you just saw. I don't know how often I'll be back or when I'll be back, but this was honestly a great return to form, and if I have some time, sometime soon-ish, I'll make another one. I do, however, think I need to come up with a snappy title. Gast has support science, so maybe I should call this Design Dissection? Name's still pending. Anyways, thanks for watching. I have been your friendly neighborhood Zerk. Peace out.